having this webinar today with Professor Jesús Sosa. Professor Jesús Sosa is our guest speaker, our keynote for this workshop, this webinar, and we're very happy to have him here. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about Jesús. As you all know, Jesús is VenTESOL President, but Jesús he's also a professor at the University of ULA, and he also works at Academia Anglo-Americana in Mérida. And he's been working in teaching English and languages for many years now. And he has a lot of experience, not only at the university level, but also in other levels of educations and in different type of institutions, public and private. So I have had the opportunity to work with Jesus for so long in VenTESOL and in other areas. We also have been going partners in working in other events. So the experience he's going to share with us today is immense, big, and we will be very grateful and thankful because he's sharing that with us. So as you could see in the title of this webinar, he's going to be talking about 10 things or so teaching beginners online can teach you, or what teaching beginners online can teach us. What can we learn from that as teachers? And he's going to be sharing his experience with us today. Many of us and many of our colleagues around the world are wondering right now what to do. What am I supposed to work with now that I'm going fully online, especially with beginners, with someone who has never learned English? Well, Jesus is going to tell us a little bit about this today. So Jesus, welcome, please. You can address the audience now.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and I would like to also thank the Authors Corner for inviting me to share some of my experience and have this conversation with you. I'm really honored to be sharing this experience. I'm gonna share my screen, and please let me know when you see it so we can start talking. Can you see it?
It says that you have, yes, now we can see you're sharing your screen. Yes.
Okay. So as Johannes was saying, I've had the opportunity to work with different kind of groups and in different settings. Since the pandemic started, I've had also had the opportunity to work online with these groups, just as before, and see the difference between working with them face to face and in online teaching. You're going to see that in this one, you're going to see that my main places of working with beginners are different contexts. One of them is Academia Anglo-Americana, which is my main place of work right now with beginners. I teach level 1 online for students. And it's a general program of English. So it's like the 4 skills. And we do it through live sessions in this case. In the case of the School of Modern Languages at ULA University, they are beginner students, but with writing. They do have some knowledge of English, but they're starting to learn writing in their case. And then I also had the opportunity of working with Gestión Gastronómica, that's English for gastronomy, more on the side of ESP. That was for students who didn't know anything about English, and they had to learn English for the purposes of gastronomy. So it was like a double challenge in this case. So I started wondering, what have I learned with working with them? How could I share this knowledge, because I have other colleagues working in these fields and on this area, and how can I do to solve this? So I found 10 tips plus of elements we can all take into consideration based on the learnings you get from your students. So let's start right away with the number one. And number one is make your students aware of their role as autonomous learners. We already know that working online means your students are going to need a lot of independent work because you are not there all the time, or you are not there on a synchronous way. So that means you need to make them aware and not assume different elements or things. And here's a way on how you could do it. Like, do you remember your students are learning a language through technology and becoming digital literate through language? That's something you need to understand because they might not know it. We might assume that they know technology, and that might be the case, but it's not the same using technology for academic purposes and using it for a daily life or the things they have to do. So we need to make them aware of that. Do tell your students what is expected from them because everybody, and if you can, do it from day one or at least at the beginning of each unit or each section or each term that you work with them. Do let them know what is your class or methodology. For example, in my case with my students, if it's from Academia Anglo-Americana, I need to tell them about the program or about how the program works, and that's something we're going to discuss later. But if you're going with flipped classroom, if you're going with online learning, do it. You have the images. For example, I share that with my students. What is expected from an Anglo student? What is expected from an Anglo teacher? And what is expected from the community? Do that with them. And you can see I did similar with students at university. That is something you can do and have fun. Like, let them know about you structure the students, about the class, about all the different elements they should have in consideration. And you can even do this in something as simple as in an email, like the one you see down there. Just inform them of all of these different elements. And if you have the space, do find some space to discuss theories such as 21st century learning skills or digital literacy with them. It wouldn't hurt to let them know that it exists, that is something they should be aware of, and they should be putting it into practice. Okay? So the clearer it is for everyone about the situation and the methodology, the better it would be for you and for them because everyone would be aware of what is expected from each one of us. If we continue on this one, this might sound obvious in this case, but always aim for a goal when you plan your lessons. And why do I say this? Sometimes we just plan a lesson to put something into practice, but what is the goal of putting that skill into practice with your students? What is the goal of the lesson? And if you work with books, you're going to see that it says grammar, vocabulary, real words, help with listening. But no, so that which is the final goal of doing that? Like today, we're going to learn how to give and receive advice. Today, we're going to learn how to gossip. Today, we're going to learn how to behave in a restaurant. Today, we're going to learn how to introduce people or how to introduce ourselves. Those final goals are going to help you define and see how your class is going to go. Also, take into consideration what will students be able to do by the end of that lesson or that unit or that level that goes again with the goal that you might have, because that is going to help you have clear sessions with them. And in this case, something that you could do is try methodologies or approaches that help you optimize your class time and stimulate interaction. Because, as you may know already, sometimes when we're working with online lessons, we cannot make them too long. Like if I have a 2 hours face-to-face session, sometimes my online class is going to be 1 hour, 1.5 hours, maybe half an hour. But it's not usually the same length as the other one because your students don't have the same receptivity on the online arena. And something that you could also do is use strategies as I can statements, exit tickets, and other alternatives for assessment on your classes. I'm going to see a list below of this one. I can statements are those easy peasy things you can do even on a piece of paper. Like after this lesson, I can do this, or I can do that, or I understand this, and they can check all of the abilities they have. You can even create an I can journal to advise their pace. And with the exit tickets, is like before finishing this lesson, you need to do this before receiving your exit ticket so you may leave on this case. So if we go with some of the approaches or methodologies, the backward design could become quite useful, especially for those teachers who are not following like a course book or a program, because you end your planning by setting the final goal of the unit or of the lesson that you have. I want my students by the end of this to be able to recognize create a conversation of being on a restaurant and asking for the different items on a menu. That's my final goal. And then you plan how you're going to assess that final goal that you have, and you see, well, I have these options, which is the one that goes more with what I wanted to do, that is to be able to order some food and ask for the price, which is a specific one that I want to need. Sometimes you're going to realize, well, fill in the blanks is not going to be the correct option for that one. And then having those two elements in mind, you start doing the activities that will take your students to that assessment, that will take your students to that final goal that you have. So backward design could come quite handy for you in this case. Another one that you could apply is the flipped classroom. Flipped classroom is more of a hybrid model, but you could take it to a complete online arena if you find the elements on how to do so. Usually what happens on a class is that you deliver the content, you do some of the practices and activities. If you have the time, you solve doubts, and then you send homework to your students. What you do on a flipped approach is that the direct instruction is sent to the students' own personal spaces. So they can check the content, check the theories, check the elements, and then you use the class time to practice, to contextualize, to give some real feedback, to give personalized attention to your students. And then the place outside the classroom also gets to be a place for your students to check knowledge, to see what they understood or not, or to recheck some of the elements of the class. And you can see there some of the basic principles on how to flip. First, you choose the topics you want to flip on your class. Maybe not all of them. That wouldn't be a good advice if you're starting on this one. Then you locate the content, or you create the content that you want to use. You include an incentive. For example, you tell them you're going to find this information, or you're going to write this short paragraph, or I want you to interact in the chat in this way, or you're going to talk with this kind of person, for them to be prepared and do something before the class. And then you provide activities for them to put into practice the concept that they have had. That on the lower side is actually an image from the MIT. They created this table to help teachers on how to choose their content and how to flip it. If you go on the lower level of the Bloom taxonomy, that's good. That's something you get to flip. The higher it gets, the harder it gets to flip. So it's better to leave it for your face-to-face sessions or your synchronous sessions if you're working with a complete online setting, as some of us have, because not every place has gone back to hybrid sessions. And then you can see here different kinds of activities that we usually have for classes, both online and face-to-face, like multiple choice, matching, true and false, fill in the blanks, flows and dictation, and type of essays or oral interviews. But if you see the column on the right, you see that there is a vast world of possibilities for working on alternative assessments that you could put into practice with your students. Maybe not all of them are going to be synchronous, but they work, and it's something that you could include in your program. And maybe your program is not even synchronous. If you're in Venezuela, for example, most of your program is going to be asynchronous. So you get to work on different elements that will also help you get through that final goal in mind. If we continue to tip number 3, again, it's more about quality than about quantity. I already told you about, you may not be able to have your sessions as long as expected. You may have, for example, us at university, semesters used to be 16 weeks long. Now they're 8 weeks long, and you still have to deliver the same content. So how do you get to deliver content and quality? You need to make choices, and you need to decide which are the elements you're going to adapt and how are you going to be able to adapt them, especially because some programs are designed to have activities on the face-to-face classroom, and students are going to have either similar answers, or you could improve them to be more creative. These images that you see on the screen right now were part of a guide we created for teachers at Anglo Americana. We provide them with different solutions like what could I adapt, how could I adapt it, how could I make decisions. And you have three different examples there. For example, number one says there's a unit that works about items in a room that we need to match. Like this is the pillow, number one. This is another number two. So how could you change it? Okay, ask your students to take a picture or and then with a voice note identify the different elements, like share those elements. If they don't want to share their rooms because of privacy issues, maybe ask them to Google a room and identify that room and the different elements they can find. For example, there was another one that was working with colors and with clothes. Okay, easy peasy, and you may have done this before. Let's have a fashion show and show your peers how you're dressed and the choices you would make for different occasions. Or ask one of your students to describe the elements another student is doing. And then you have the case number three, which is not for beginners in this case, but something we did to adapt the activities with books and other tools that you could cope with and help your students use for the purposes of your classes. What is the point here? You need to make good use of the elements that you have at hand. You need to make use of creativity because if your program follows face to face interaction patterns, you're going to end up just like me saying, okay, I have 10 students on a session, and the exercise says match this to this. And that's it. And that's the end. There are not other answers. There are no other elements. So you need to look for those and you get to join activities to make them put into practice more than one skill, to have a real challenge, and for you to obtain different answers from your students. This will take us to the fourth tip that I have for you. Don't buy into technological gimmicks. And with this one, what I mean is you always need to have a pedagogical goal in mind, and that pedagogical goal is the one that is going to define the technology you use. Why? Because there are plenty of options online, and this is just a short list of all the tools and softwares that you get to use online. Most of them have free versions or or versions that are not so expensive. In my case, I always try to go for the free versions because, well, that's what my context asks me to do. But you need to be aware that this is something that you need to base your decision on the needs that you have. For example, I've seen that CISO is being quite used by other people, same as Nearpod, for example. And I love working with Nearpod on a workshop, but it was not going to be enough for me to work with my students because that's not something I can have access to. So something that you could take into consideration for this one is this basic triangle. You have your context, you have the goals and the needs that you have, and you have the resources. If you have a context where you don't get to pay for the premium softwares, well, I'm not going to use those. I need to analyze the free versions and how open they are to give me this. Which is the skill my students are going to develop? Which is the context I have? For example, if you are in Merida, you need to plan based on the fact that you are going to run out, your electricity is going to be off at some point, or it's not going to be good. So maybe synchronous is not the best if you have a large group. Some of my groups, for example, have students who don't live in the same context because they live abroad. So you need to take all of that into consideration. These are some of the solutions we have found uh, at Academia Angloamericana and at ULA, for example. One of our teachers, his name is Ricardo, he created this where you see lesson one, he created ebooks. Those ebooks have all the multimedia content of each lesson. They have videos, they have audios, they have everything. Each book is like 100 and 120 megabytes. But once you get to download that, you don't need anything else to work with. So you don't depend on the internet, and you have all the multimedia you need. Another option we had was supplementing our lessons, and that time students are not in class with Duolingo for education. That's something you could also get to do because you get to assign and plan the lessons. Something that we also decided is okay, let's work with Classroom because it works with the Google Suite and we get to combine the different tools Google offers. That in terms, for example, of one of my contexts. The other one that you see on the upper side is at Universidad de los Andes, in my case, the Modern Languages School. I decided, okay, let's go to work with Google Sites because they're optimized for mobile phones. They're easy enough to use, they're easy enough to create, and then we combine that with a WhatsApp group and deliver activities through a chat forum format. And you can see some of the elements we share there because that's the context and that's what we have. I don't have students who own computers, so I need to plan my lessons based on mobile phones. That's all I have. And in the case that you see downstairs of English in the for gastronomy, what we decided to do was create PDF books, not e-books as the ones from Anglo Americana, but these PDF books contain the basics of each lesson, and they provide students with the links to go to the things they need to watch, like some of the videos and some of the tools. That means they do need to have the internet connection to check all of the elements, but at least they have a base to work with while they're on their home places. And this is something that you could see. The three different contexts have these three different solutions, but at the end of the day, all of them are working somehow, and all of them are helping students to continue with their activities, and all of them allow the teacher and the students to share space, communicate, and work. Okay? Number five might seem obvious for some of us, but we don't realize until we have complete beginners and we start seeing the results of switching or not switching between languages. So always try to have a balance between your students' own language and the language that they are learning. Why? I don't know if you have had this kind of students, but sometimes if you tell your students, okay, hey, so this is an adjective. Teacher, what is an adjective? Or this is a preposition. Teacher, what is a preposition? Or do you know like blue? Blue is a color, so colors are adjective because they give properties to things. No, we don't get that because they don't get it in Spanish in our case. So imagine trying to put yourself in the position of a student where you need to understand the colors and how they work in English, but also not understanding the language itself that you're using and not understanding how Spanish works in the case of my students. So having that extra pressure of not understanding the Spanish base in the case of my students or the ones that you have, or trying to understand the activity itself and then giving all the explanation in English in this case, sometimes it's not necessary. I'm not saying don't go all the way to Spanish, but do find a way, even if it's just giving the instruction in English and then in Spanish. And that's why I give you some tips that say, like, for example, do help your students understand their own language. I know it's going to take you extra minutes, but it's going to work it, especially if you're going to be working with them on a different level or if they're going to continue on a program. The sooner you do it, the better it's going to be for all of you. Do take advantage of how their language works, like make a contrastive analysis. Okay, so here's how it works in Spanish, this is how it works in English. You can see some of the differences. For some students, it is quite useful because that's the way they learn. Don't spend too much time on those explanations because if they're beginners, they might not need them. But when it comes the time to do so, take advantage of that time. And even though, yes, you should make a balance because we're talking about complete beginners, don't forget you need to push it up because at some point they will need to understand English. In our case, for example, level one starts with like a 50-50%, and then we take it up because at level two, a big part of our explanations are given in English. And then in level three, you're expected to give a whole class in English and for your students to at least understand, even if they don't if they don't communicate completely in English, they understand everything that you're saying. So you also need to have that in mind, especially if you work in an institution where your students are going to go on more than just one level of English. If we continue to suggestion number six, we're almost like halfway through these tips. Know when to correct and when to let your students be. If you're working with complete beginners, you're going to have these moments like, for example, I know my students are going to struggle saying your because they're going to say your. I know they're going to say yellow. I'm going to know that doing the flip like can I can is going to be tough for them. I'm going to know they don't know some of the vocabulary, so they're going to try to say words the wrong way. So the thing is that you need to understand when is the right moment to correct and when to give them the feedback because you know which is the knowledge they're going to have. Remember, we're talking about complete beginners, okay? I'm not going with other levels, but with complete beginners. So if you see on the right side, one of my students, she got confused between the use of thanks or thanks very much. And it was like, okay, I rephrased, I gave her the question how to do it. And she was like, okay, thank you. Something that you could also do is rephrasing and using the correct way so they see and it's like, oh, okay, I get to do this. But be aware there are some things that you're not going to accomplish in just one class. For example, I know that on a first class, my students are not going to go 100% complete the difference between E and E. So I'm not going to focus on correcting the whole class because I'm going to lose time and they're going to feel afraid of participating. If you see on the upper image, for example, one of my students wrote this for a first test, which was basically about my name is and the letters. And he wrote, perfect teacher, thank you for all. I have emotion of learn more every day. And then he corrected and say emotion. Is that correct? No, it's not. But we need to take into consideration this is a level one student who had four classes. None of the elements that he wrote on that sentence were taught in those four classes. So you need to be a little open on those ideas. So if it's possible for you and in those moments, let them create their own hypothesis and don't restrain them of doing so. Maybe by the end of the class, you could be a general feedback. Maybe by the end of the class, you could send them a private message, but let them be at the moment because that way they're going to feel comfortable with the use of English. Okay? And always praise their achievement, even if it's not completely perfect. Like, okay, you're closer, you did it good today, and then continue because that's going to motivate them to do their best job. You should also let your students know your class is a safe space because if like me you find students who come from different schools, maybe at school they're taught that mistakes are punished, but the classroom is not a place for mistakes to be punished, at least on these kind of lessons, because you need them to overcome those mistakes and learn from them. So it's like this is a place to learn from mistakes. And also something that also happens is that let your students know, at least if your institution works that way, your students won't be discriminated for not sounding like a native because sometimes they don't talk or they don't want to do things or they feel ashamed because his teacher, I don't sound like people on the States or I don't sound like people on the United Kingdom. And okay, I don't sound like them either. And here you see me talking. So you need to let them realize it is safe for them to do those kind of practices and hypotheses with the language. This one, sometimes we don't notice, provide clear, concise, and more important, consistent instructions to your students. And you're going to see why on this one. Especially when you talk with your students, we tend to do this kind of things. Like fill in the gaps, fill in the blanks, complete the spaces, put the word in the lines. We give different instructions for the same activity, sometimes in the very same activity, and our students could get confused because they are trying to understand the classroom language that they're using. So if you keep switching from one to another one, it's going to be confusing for them and it's going to be harder for them to understand what you're saying because again, they're seeing you through a screen and sometimes maybe their audio won't be working as much or maybe they have people around them talking or doing some noise. So make it easy for them because consistent on the way you're delivering the instructions that you have. Something that you could also do is checking your speed when you talk as well as articulation. And this happened to me recently when a student, I was working with them for 2 weeks. And suddenly the student said, "Teacher, could you please lower your pace and talk slower?" And I was like, "Yeah, for sure." And I said, "Why didn't you tell me before?" And she said, "I didn't realize until now, and that's why it was so difficult for me to understand." And I was like, I felt a little guilty because I forgot it was a level one and I was talking at a natural pace. So it's something you could put into practice if you see your students are struggling a little. Of course, as time goes by, go to a more natural pace because even the audios they use, as simple as they are, they also aim for a natural pace. If you use a course book, like most of us do, it is always helpful to show them where the things are and where the activities are. Some of your students might be using also the online version of your books. So trying to have the book and the screen to see what you're sharing is half of them. So if you get to show them, it's going to help them follow the instructions and get to be more sure about the place they are. Something that I told you right from the beginning, try to avoid having 5 different ways to deliver the same instruction, at least during the class. It's good if you get to say the things in 5 different ways because then your students are going to understand there are different ways to convey the same information. But if you're a complete beginner, it's going to be a hard life for you in this case. And if you're working again with complete beginners, which is our case, avoid complex structures at least at the beginning. If you're on your first class or your second class or maybe your class number 10 even, using too many structures in the past or perfect tenses or complex and compound sentences with students that are learning to say, "Hey, the pharmacy is next to the bus stop." I mean, it's going to make their life harder to get some of the elements. So, when possible, because again, I'm saying you need to also take it to those levels, avoid having too many, let's going to say too many complex structures when you talk to them and when you deliver the information. And this goes especially for those of us who have to deliver instructions like progress tests or evaluations or portfolios completely in English. If we continue to our tip number 8, since you're working online and since you have the chance to combine synchronous and asynchronous, maybe you have the chance, create a learning community with your students because that will be a safe space they have. That will be the most similar thing they're going to have of a classroom if you're working online with them. So if you see on the right, one of my students couldn't attend, and then another student gave part of the feedback, so I decided to wait a little on this one. So do encourage your students to be co-builders of knowledge in and outside your class. You're going to have stronger students, and more likely if you create a good environment, they're going to help you provide. Like I have this student that I have one student who never knows which activity are we in. So the other students are like, "Hey, we're on this page, this is the activity," or "Hey, this is what you have to do," because sometimes I put my microphone off and I let them have short discussions, again, English and Spanish. So if he feels lost, they help them. And that way, they also become leaders and part of the project. So encourage them to do all of those elements. And that way, part of the responsibility, which should be, is also on them as co-creators of knowledge. Do also take advantage of your online setting and stimulate the curiosity. Like you're talking about a personality or a famous person or a city or a country. They don't know about it. Okay, let's Google. Let's take a minute to Google. Or you please Google about this while we work on this element of the activity. And that is going to also stimulate the community practice because it's not going to be only you having all the knowledge and only you giving all the answers because that could even be exhausting for yourselves. Okay? If you have a chat, like I can show you this chat at Anglo Americana, we have it through Hangouts. because we decided let's not give our students phone numbers or Telegram. Let's work on Hangouts because it's practical for all of us to be on the same place. Okay, so if your students have questions or have comments or have anything they have to do, maybe leave some space for other students to answer first, and then you do the talking. Sometimes what I said to my students at English for Gastronomy, for example, and we work on WhatsApp on this one, is this is your deadline for submitting activities. This is the date where you get to interact and provide feedback to your peers' work. And then the following day, it's going to be for me to interact with you and provide some of the activities and feedback myself together with you. So you gave them some room and some space to work and to do the things. And again, always make them feel safe about asking any questions they might have, because you might have this situation, students saying like, well, I have a silly question, or this is stupid, or this one you already said in the class before. Okay, okay, but let's solve it. Let's find a solution. Don't stay with your question. Don't stay with your doubt. Don't think this is silly because another person might have that same question and is also afraid of asking. So be open and do so. In this case, that again might sound a little obvious, take some time not only to teach your students the language, but also to teach them how the program works. And this is especially if you work in a language academy such as I do, or if you have different levels, or if you are giving personalized lessons and you need to define a path for that student. You see, it goes all the way. So provide information on how to follow the materials that you're going to use and all the tools that you're going to use. Provide information on the evaluation, the dates, the procedures. If you have rubrics, show them the rubrics to also know what they are going to be expected. And this connects to elements I was talking before. Okay? You can see, for example, on the images, that one is a rubric of a portfolio we had. And another example that you see is a whole evaluation plan that was given to the students like, okay, we're going to work online. These are the different things we're going to work on this lesson. These are the different dates for the exams. This is what is going to be expected for you. These are the contents that we're going to be delivered. If you have the time, if you have the space, and if you have the tools, please do so. Some books, if you work with books, they have it right at the beginning. Well, take the time and do it, okay? And for example, does your book, if you work with books, have different sections? How do they work? How do they connect? What should students expect from each one of those? And what should they do in case they miss a session? Because again, in an online setting, your student might miss a session if you go synchronous. Okay? So it is important to also teach them how to work. If you work with books in this specific case, maybe you have a student book, maybe you have a workbook. Maybe that workbook has another booklet that is of the summary of all of the elements. Maybe they connect, and maybe on your teacher book you have the instructions on how they connect. Okay, so let your students know how they connect because they might need that information to work on their workbooks or to work by themselves, or at least to have them have less questions for you and to help you solve the time, especially if it's your individual teacher time. Because as you might already be aware, teaching online takes you a lot more of time than teaching face to face lessons. Number 10, and we're close to the end and the pluses. Don't forget about your emotional health. Like, we are in a context where your house is your office and is your classroom and is the school. So if the concept of digital literacy is not fully grounded on you and on your students, you might have a problem with boundaries. And your students are going to approach at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., 3 a.m., a Sunday night or a Saturday night where you're going away, where you're having a moment of break. So, and sometimes you're on your house and you say, okay, I'm not usually working at this time, but I know there's this thing I need to do, so I'm going to do it. And suddenly it is 11 p.m. and you're still working on those things and you're not relaxing, especially if you work with big groups. such as it happens to us in Venezuela. So set times, like this is the time I have to work, this is the time I have to enjoy, this is the time I have to eat. Try to keep yourself organized because your house cannot become your complete office. You need to separate the times for each one of those elements. And as I tell you there will always be something to do, but you also need to take care of yourself because it's not doing anything good for you if you keep sacrificing and doing all of these elements. And if you get sick or something happens, you will feel bad, you won't be able to do anything, and your students will also be not able to continue the pace, maybe, because you won't be with them. So by the end of the day, you will all lose. So find the time to do some teacher self-care and to devote some time and don't pay attention to the monster that keeps telling you you have things to do. We start with the pluses. There are two pluses that I wanted to share with you. Do remember that you're not alone. Sometimes you think that you're alone and you're not. You have a whole community willing to support you on the administrative side, on the teaching side, and on the training side. In our case, for example, my latest experience and the longest one I've had is working fully online with fully level oneers at Anglo. I have a programs coordinator who does a wonderful job at guiding me, and also an academic director, and also other teachers, such as the one I mentioned before. They're always willing to be a team and to support you because you're a community and you're delivering a service. At university, for example, maybe you have a head of the department or a head of the research center or something like that. Maybe it's not even a teacher, but someone from administrative staff that provides the support that you need. So do remember that you're not an island. Maybe you're at home working, but you have a whole community that should be willing to provide you with some support. And even if you're a freelance teacher working with lessons by yourself, maybe you have colleagues that you can exchange information with that could help you with ideas, solutions, and to innovate and work with these groups because a lot of us are working with beginners on different contexts. And again, this one might seem obvious, but have fun. Have fun while working with your students. Even if it's a boring lesson, if you're having fun, your students are going to notice and they will also have fun. Share some of these stories, share a joke, let them share jokes, let them have some space to tell you about some of their personal life. Connect with them as humans. It's not teachers and students, they're human beings interacting and doing things. So also do give some spaces for this. As you can see, um, for example, this was my first class with one of my level ones. I actually asked my students like, may I take a picture because I want to take a picture. And then the student you see up, like she has the camera there. She said, I was going to take a picture. And we all laughed and we had a good moment. And then they keep messing with each other, in easy busy ways, about the activities and the elements. So always allow space for doing that. And always you should also enjoy the lesson because by the end of the day, you're always learning. It doesn't matter how much you know, you're going to learn with your complete beginner students who are learning to say one, two, three. There will always something new to learn. So also allow space for those moments. And even though we have talked a little about tips, suggestions, and elements on how to try to plan like this perfect session or have this perfect environment with our complete beginner students, um, sometimes you just need to be aware that it won't work. Sometimes that perfect lesson won't work. Sometimes your students are not going to be able to participate, or they won't like the lesson, or something will happen. Maybe they had an issue, maybe they're sleepy, maybe they're hungry, and it's going to affect the lesson. It's going to affect the outcome. Sometimes the outcome might be awful, but it's fine. Okay, it's fine. If that happens, just take the time to identify what was the source of the issue and say, okay, so this is something I can control, and this is the way I'm going to change it, or this didn't depend on me, but I get to help, or this depended on the context and I cannot solve it, so that's it. It happened to me like 1 week before. There was a blackout in the whole state, and I had this really amazing lesson prepared, and all of my students were there, and they were all ready to engage, and then boom, electricity went black. I couldn't do anything. I had to breathe. I had to say, okay, we need to cancel the session, and I did it like almost an hour after because I had no internet. But when I got into the chat, my students, the ones who were abroad, because the ones in media didn't have the chance, they kept talking about the elements, and then they decided, okay, we need to find solutions to recover this session. Let's talk about our schedules so the rest of the class knows, and we can save time when deciding when to retake this lesson. And it was amazing because it didn't depend on me, it didn't depend on them, but they found a solution, not me, because I was not there. So don't overcomplicate yourself if sometimes elements don't work for that class. Okay? Thank you very much, guys. Uh, it was really nice to share some of these comments with you. Um, well, I'm guessing that there are any questions or comments. I could leave Johannes with us on this moment.
Jesus, thank you very much for sharing with us, I mean, your experience and all the things that you've been learning while teaching beginners online, especially in such a difficult context like the one you have, because at least the ones like us that are outside the country, we do have internet connection regularly and power and electricity, but you guys are doing a great job in a very difficult context where you sometimes, a lot of times or most of the times, don't have power nor internet, and not just the teachers, but also there are many students in Venezuela that they lack of resources, not even a smartphone to connect.
Yeah, and I mean, this might sound like romantic or corny or romanticizing a crisis, but if you're on this teaching context, if you're passionate about teaching, and if your students who are motivated, you're going to find creative solutions. I know it's not ideal situations, and if you're a teacher who are in an ideal situation, congratulations, this is going to be easier for you. But things can get done, okay? Even if you find more constraints, still you're going to find some creative ways, and you can see that some of the elements we talked here, uh, you need to take them into consideration, regardless if you have blackouts or not, or have phones or not. Some of them are even taken into consideration if you're face to face or online. So it could go for all of us on this case.
Yeah.
Don't let well, again, this is going to sound romantic. Don't let the crisis take you that hard, at least.
Yes, yes, and that's true. Because before, when there was no internet, also there were some challenging situations, even in the
Mm-hmm.
classroom live session. I mean, they are face to face.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we normally do. We do have some questions when you were talking. We received, well, the first question we received was how do we do when we're asked to fill in notebooks and cover content, but we have less time? As you said, we need to delete something. Otherwise, kids will be overwhelmed. In fact, they are overwhelmed.
They are,
So
yeah.
what can we do there? I mean, Mariana is asking that.
Okay, something that you could do is first you could combine synchronous and asynchronous activities if your institution lets you, because I know, for example, some institutions only allow you to have synchronous sessions, and that for me is painful. You could have like one synchronous session a week and then offline work. Okay, that could help you cover some of the basics that you have. Again, like I told you, do adapt. If normally they do 1, 2, or 3 activities, try combining them to have one activity that is going to help them develop more than one skill. You could avoid some of the things that are like yes or no questions, for example. If you get to avoid those, it's going to help you save time too. Um, and this is going to sound like a little crazy, but sometimes those constraints that you talk about are not coming from other teachers or other language experts, but because you have a coordinator at a school that says, well, all teachers need to do all of the elements. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm the language teacher. This is something I'm suggesting. This is the why. Like, do pay attention to what I'm saying, because I don't teach arts, I don't teach science, I teach languages. And I'm giving you the things on why to do so. And don't be afraid of also standing and defending your position with your coordinators or your administrative staff, because sometimes they don't know how hard it is to do all of those elements. But yeah, on those, I would say adapt the way I told you, combine synchronous and asynchronous. If you don't have the possibility, ask for that possibility, fight for that possibility, because they're going to end up crazy, especially if it's kids who have different subjects in class. Okay?
Thank you, Jesus, for that answer, Mariana. I hope, or we hope that answers your question. We do have other question here. How can we go on helping our students in an asynchronous context where they don't get a task, even when instructions are clear and similar to the ones given before? For
Okay.
example, let's say
Uh-huh.
they have received examples in class of similar activities, but then they're working alone at home. How can we help them?
Okay, in that case, something that you would do is, for example, if you plan your activity and you say you need to hand in this thing, and we're talking asynchronously for what I saw, this is not something they're going to do from one day or another one. If I send an activity to my students, they're going to have like more or less 1 week. I always tell them you need to find the space to connect once a week to work on your activities. So they're going to have the time. If you have a platform that has a forum side, okay, create a forum for Q&As. Maybe you could separate one for academic Q&As, one for IT related Q&As, and they could post their questions. You could help them, but again, leave some space for another student to give the answer first, depending on how your group works. If you have a chat, such as I have with my students, they get to use the chat. The important thing here would be what is the amount of time they have to deliver that activity. Because if they have enough time, they're going to be able to ask the question, even if it's asynchronous. Okay? If you log in once a day during the morning, they will know that if they ask in the afternoon, they're going to be answered the next morning. Or if they ask early in the morning, they might have their question right away. And that also goes with providing instructions, the methodology. Like, I'm going to be online from 9 till 10, answering questions on the chat or on Hangouts. That's it. So if you give it at 6 p.m., I'm going to answer it at 8 a.m. And that will help with your students in asynchronous activities with a time frame for them.
Great, Jesus. Thank you. There was a question from one of our participants on YouTube. We hope that was the answer he was expecting. We do have another question here on Joel is asking on YouTube. How can we motivate students to be part of the community? There are some who don't want to participate. I mean, and that happens, or that happened normally in a regular classroom. Imagine now online.
um, Okay, sometimes you get to talk with those students by private, even if it's just on a chat or on an email. Try to get to know them. Try to know what makes them feel passionate about. And if you get to include that in some of the activities, that could help them to be motivated. Also, some students are reluctant to participate because they know the things or they know the things, so ask them to become leaders and interact or give that answer or interact with you to make the example for the other students. That would motivate that student. If the student doesn't know, maybe you could ask other students, for not being yourself all the time, to work with that person on the activity, to do this or to complete that space or to ask that question, and it will motivate that person. And something simple that you could also do is, before starting your class, if you log in like 5 minutes before, talk with them. How are you? How are things doing? How was your weekend? And connecting as people in that moment would also motivate them to participate. Of course, this is me being idealistic. As I told you, so in some moments, like, it doesn't matter what you do, they won't pay attention for one class or two classes. Do worry if it's something continuous and do find help. And if it's an underage student, do contact their parents, for example. That's also that you get to work with the parents. And do follow up on those elements. Again, of course, that means you need to take the extra time to give the extra mile.
Okay, thank you very much. We hope that was the answer that I was expecting. Thank you, Jesus. Also, there is another question here on our YouTube channel. It says, this is Deborah asking, can we have hybrid activities or only one time? I guess asynchronous or synchronous. I think that she wants to know which one you recommend, which are better, or using
Well,
both are better.
I mean, again, it depends on your context. If we take it, for example, here, in all the places I work, like at university or here at Academia Americana, I have online classes. I don't get to go hybrid. I have online classes. If you're a teacher in Venezuela, you don't have hybrid sessions because it's fully online still. If you're in some other countries of Latin America, you get to have hybrid lessons with online and face-to-face sessions. Again, flipped classroom would be amazing for that to make a good use. But more likely, it's not a decision that you make. Now, if we talk in the case of hybrid between synchronous and asynchronous sessions, if it was my own program, if it was the things I would do, I would combine synchronous and asynchronous sessions as necessary, because in most of my cases, my students have complete knowledge, no, complete the knowledge enough, and we're developing skills that are more available to be delivered on asynchronous challenges. So I do both. But in the case of my students at Anglo Americana, I go fully online because that's what they expect, that's what they like, and that's what they need. But it's not a decision that depends completely on me or on you as a teacher.
Okay, so basically, I mean, a decision that you will make based on your context, and
Mm-hmm.
also, I mean, what the institution and also the students are expecting from the institution you work for and from you as a teacher. Uh, how do you guys, Jesus, now when I know that Merida is one of the um, states in Venezuela that has more complications with energy powered internet. So how do you guys do it at Anglo Americana? And how do you do it with ULA? I know we saw some examples.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we saw some examples you put there, but ULA in your case is a different context. That is a public
Yeah.
university with different kind of target students, and then you have Anglo,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, which have different target of students with different contexts. How do you manage to adapt? I mean, being in the same state with different students.
Okay. In the case of Anglo, we provide support to our teachers. For example, we found solutions for electrical problems. So if we have no electricity at Anglo, it means something happened regionally. So that's serious because we usually have electricity, and we also invested to provide our institution with internet for our teachers. So our teachers, regardless if they have electricity issues or not, can come here to teach their lessons. In the case of our students, we always encourage them and tell them, hey, if you're enrolling on an online course, you need to be aware that you also need to find solutions, such as we do. So they do. They move to different places, so they know they have an aunt or a neighbor or a friend, so they could move, or they know that if they don't have electricity, they have enough data to take it from their phones. And they also receive instructions on how to do if they miss a lesson, like how to work with the books independently. In the case of ULA, it's a bit harder because university doesn't give us the support we need. Like we don't have the computers, we don't have the internet, we can not go to university if it's not a flexible week. And if it's a flexible week, it's hard also to go to university. And if you go to university, you have no internet. So it depends all on you. So it makes it a bit harder. For example, in my case, sometimes I even have to teach in a public square because I had no electricity, no data, so I had to go to Plaza Bolivar because they had internet or better connectivity there, and teach in my class for 3 hours because it was a chat forum on a square. or another public space. I mean, it's not like the director of the School of Modern Languages or my dean don't want to support me, but they don't have the solutions. So you need to find them yourself as a teacher on that one. And on the other side, tell your colleagues, hey, I did it this way, and maybe it could work for you. So it's a completely different. And for that one, that's why we tend to choose more asynchronous than synchronous. And on that one, we have the constraint that students are all over the country, or some students are abroad, and most of the students are working because they're adults. So constraints are bigger, and that on that case, I would say, asynchronous is better for most of the cases.
Thank you very much, Jesus, for that answer and enlightening us. I mean, and one of the things that we need to remember as teachers is that when the time comes, we really show ourselves that we're super resourceful. We are, and that's
It
the
is.
way we're supposed to be, and very creative. So we don't have many more questions on our YouTube channel nor here. Everybody saying that everything is clear, that some of the questions they had already been answered. And Mariana is commenting now, Venezuela is another level of resistance. But as he said, we always find a way. It's true. It's true. And we admire that in Venezuelan teachers. I mean, not just the ones that are in Venezuela, but also the ones outside. Here, I mean, the situation might be a little bit different. I'm in Lima, and there are some resources, at least in the capital of this country, internet, power. But for example, some of our colleagues that were in provinces here in this country, there are some provinces where internet does not reach yet. So students here in this country are also facing a challenge, as well as teachers here. And I know that because some of our colleagues, our Venezuelan colleagues, are in some different provinces here. So Jesus, we're very happy. We become superheroes, says Blanca. Thank you, Blanca, for your comment. We become superheroes dealing with all we have to deal with. Being empathic is the clue. It's true. It's true. And thank you very much for that comment, Blanca. We really appreciate it. Jesus, thank you very much for joining us. I was reminded by Joel, the other director of the school that is with us, in charge. There he is, in charge of the live thing on YouTube and all the, I mean, technical issues of this webinar. That 1 year ago, we were, Jesus, making public the poster for the live session, the first live session we had on Instagram with you. It was
That's
last year.
amazing.
Yes, I do remember that.
Wow. Wow, it
I,
has been a long time.
I do remember that. It's been a year already. Jesus was our first guest speaker on the U Talk on Instagram, and now he's coming 1 year after to be with us here at the webinar. Jesus, thank you very much for joining us, for sharing this information. Please be known that we are not gonna stop calling you, or this is not the last time you're gonna be sharing with us at the Other's Corner. You will be working with us, and we're gonna be working with you guys, also with VenTESOL, supporting on whatever we can help with all the time. Thank you very much for joining us today. If you have some words to address your audience today, please do. If you have one last advice for them, go for it.
Um, yeah, after having said all of the things I have shared with you, like one final advice would be just be you. Um, Trust your instinct, trust yourself, trust the things that you know that you have been prepared for. Just do it. Just do it, and you're going to see you might have bright results. Thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here. It was a true honor. Thank you all of you who asked questions and gave some of the good comments. Let's keep growing as a community. Let's keep sharing, and let's keep motivating our students and the learning of the English language.
Thank you very much, Jesus. One last information before we go. We're sending on the chat box, guys, an instruction with a link. That link is the evaluation form for this webinar. And also the link will tell us who attended, because we had some or other people register for the webinar that did not attend today. So by filling this information, we will confirm attendance today in the session. And that's where we're gonna give us like the key in order to know who to send the certificate for attending this webinar. Okay, so there it is. Says this participant, please click this link and fill in the information of the evaluation form. It is very important for us that you do it, not just for the part, for your attendance, but also to know your impression on this webinar. And also you will find some other questions there, like what other topics, which other topics would you like to cover in further webinars. Okay, we're gonna be doing webinars during the rest of the year. On the second part of the year, we're still organizing the next events. So check on our social network, follow us on YouTube, on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook page as well, and you will have all the information you need. Well, I don't know if I'm missing any other information for our participants. If I am, please remind me.
No, I think that's it. Well, I loved the webinar and I hope our guests liked it too. And I was telling Johannes that exactly 1 year ago, we were publishing a post where we invited our community to a live session where Professor Jesus was going to talk about content creation, I think was the title of that live session. So we had him here with us before, and we certainly hope to have him with us once again in the future. So Professor Jesus, thank you very much.
Yes, Jesus, thank you very much. So guys, we will be closing this webinar. After you fill in information, we will receive that information. We will be sending the certificates during the week, or by the end of the next week, you will be receiving it. And please come back to our other events. We're gonna have a bunch of events during the last part of the year, the second part of the year. It's more talks, more webinars. So you are free to join us. Jesus, one more time, thank you very much and see you soon. Thank you guys. Thank you all for coming. It was a pleasure. Have a great weekend, or at least what is left of it. Bye.